Welcome everyone to MOBYCON Academy. It's my great pleasure today to have our guest Isla Tanaka from the City of Edmonton in Canada. My name is Gong, and I am an integrated mobility consultant working at MOBYCON's North American office located in Ottawa, Canada again. You may notice a change in the location because of travel restriction. I unfortunately cannot be joining you from MOBYCON studio in Delft, but I'm pleased to be able to come to you via Zoom and with the help of a production team in Delft. Because we are not in studio, we are pre-recording this section to make sure there are no technical glitches transmitting Zoom across an ocean and then through YouTube. And for that reason, there won't be an opportunity to ask Isla any questions live. But if you do have any questions after watching the session, please email us at academy@mobycon.com, and we'll be happy to pass them on to Isla. And I hope you enjoy today's interview. And like I said, our guest Isla Tanaka is from Edmonton. For many people who do not know about Edmonton, it is the capital city in the Prairie province of Alberta in Canada, with approximately 1 million population. And I was once living in Edmonton for over a decade. And I can testify you can literally see snow and ice on the ground for almost 6 months a year. So Edmonton is truly a winter city. And there's no better person to talk about Edmonton's winter than our guest today, Isla. Isla, can you introduce yourself to our audience?
Yes, well, and thank you for having me. So I am the winter city planner for the City of Edmonton, and I work on a project called the Winter City Strategy. And I've been working on it for almost 8 years now. So I talk about winter all year.
Great. And I guess to start your story, how did Edmonton's Winter City Strategy come about?
So Edmonton was like many cities. 10 years ago, we were winter wimps. We stayed inside. Many of our parks were closed in the winter. We had built our city so that we could stay inside for most of the year. We have a pedway system, which is called a +15 system in some cities. So basically we have tunnels underground and we have walkways over the street in much of our downtown. So we had built our city really to stay inside. And one of our city councilors decided it was time to change that. And it was Councillor Ben Henderson, and he's been the political champion tied to this project. And he just decided that we needed to get outside more and embrace winter. So that's really how it started.
And you said the strategy started how many years ago?
So it was developed about 10 years ago. It was adopted by City Council in 2012, and then the implementation plan was adopted in 2013. So it's a 10-year strategy, and we're about 8 years into it now.
I see. Okay. Yeah, because when I was in Edmonton, I heard lots of locals joke about Edmonton being Edmonton in winter because it was boring. It had nothing to do in winter. It's great that the paradigm is shifting, right? Like thanks to the Winter City Strategy.
That's right. Edmonton, we were really, that was something that moniker that we really clung to for a while. And Edmontonians are also very good at talking about how it's -30 for 6 months of the year, which really, as you know, is not true. On average, we get about 3.5 days of down close to that temperature. And some winters we don't actually hit -30, but -28 is pretty cold too, but we don't, those are our extreme temperatures. Yeah. But if we just build for those days, then we miss out. Most days are nice days. So, that's what we wanted to focus on and wanted to build for.
Yeah, because Edmonton is one of the sunniest city in Canada too, right?
That's right. So we're right in the middle of the Canadian prairies. And so, we have a lot of sun in the summer and in the winter time. So we have, because we're in the prairies, we have extreme temperatures, very hot, can be very hot in the summer and very cold in the winter. We're also North America's northernmost large city. But really, relatively speaking, compared to some of the Western European cities, we're not very far north. So we're about the same as Manchester and Hamburg. We like to talk about us being very north, and in North America, it's relative. We are north, but we don't have the extreme darkness that some of those northern European cities have. But our temperatures are much colder just because of where we are geographically.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I see. And can you explain in a nutshell what are the focus areas and guiding principles for the Winter City strategy?
Yes, absolutely. So the strategy was developed by a community-led task force, which means it was all community members that sat on that task force. And we did a lot of public consultation with industry and with community. And when we went to the public, actually, we asked them, what would help you fall in love with winter in Edmonton? So we were really trying to focus on the assets and bringing emotion into it. And so we got hundreds and hundreds of ideas. We said to them, just think big. What would you like to see here in Edmonton? And so that task force took in all of those ideas, and every one that was adopted into the strategy had to be authentic, meaning it had to work for Edmonton. Helsinki has some great ideas. Montreal does some great things in the winter, but our winters are very different. We don't get the same type of snow as Montreal, and we're colder than Helsinki. So some ideas we could adopt and some we couldn't. So like I said, one of those guiding principles was that every idea that went into the strategy has to be authentic for Edmonton. Yeah, the ideas also had to be attitude changing. We were really looking at a cultural shift. And then the last one was that they had to be sustainable. And we mean that partly in the environmental sense, but really we wanted them to be long-term. We didn't want this to be just a 2 or 3 year, flash in the pan idea. People got out for a couple of winters and then started hibernating again. We really wanted the strategies to be sustainable, multi-generational, and just, make that long-term cultural shift. So those are the guiding principles we had, were those three. And we used a systems thinking approach. So much like we used the iceberg model. So we didn't want to just focus on those things that show at the top, right? Those festivals and events that the public really sees. We really wanted to dig deep down into our maintenance procedures, our policies, even our bylaws. Councillor Henderson said, don't focus on what the regulations are now, what our bylaws are now. We can change those. So he wanted us and the public to really think big. And that systems thinking model really helped us dive right down into those mindsets, those unconscious mindsets that, minus 30 all the time, so that we could have a long-term change. And so part of what we've done too is focus on language and how do we talk about winter. And then those three guiding principles have helped, even with the implementation, making that, that change right down to those mental models. And we have changed policies. We've changed, and we're looking at some of the bylaws right now.
I see. Yeah. So it sounds like it's very transformative, right? It's not only encouraging people to be outside, but you change the narrative so people feel more encouraged and feel comfortable being outdoor, being in the winter.
Exactly. That was the intention, was really a transformation. Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah. And you gave a very good example about the Winter City is not just about creating festivals. It's not about just being social outdoor, but also maybe facilitating more opportunities for active transportation in winter, right? Mm-hmm. And I know you're also a board member of the Winter Cycling Confederation. And what role do you see cycling can serve in the Winter City?
Right. So yes, I was asked to sit on the board of the Winter Cycling Federation last year, and it's a great organization sharing lots of aspects about winter cycling. And I think cycling has a large role to play in our cities in general. And I think when we add a winter lens, it keeps people outside. And let's face it, we're facing a climate crisis globally. And so cycling is one of the answers. It gets people out of cars, and it reduces the congestion, reduces the greenhouse gases. So if we have the right type of infrastructure to support winter cycling, then we can start to meet some of those greenhouse gas targets. We're also, a lot of cities around the world, and Edmonton included, we've just released our brand new municipal plan called the City Plan. And we talk about 15 minutes, the 15-minute city, and that seems to be a global movement as well. So we talk about districts here in Edmonton and how can people get around within 15 minutes and access everything they need. And so cycling is part of that. It's an easy way for people to get around. It extends their distance a little bit, from walking, they can get a little bit further on bike. Cycling also has huge social and physical and mental impacts in a very positive way, right? The more people are active, the healthier they are. And those are also long-term social benefits. And cycling is also a really cheap form of transportation. And so if we can make it more inclusive, then it opens up independence for a lot more people. Bike is much cheaper than a car. It's cheaper than public transportation. And so, it opens up independence to people from all socioeconomic backgrounds. It also helps a lot of people with physical disabilities ride bikes because they can't drive. Mm-hmm. Public transportation sometimes is not very accessible where they are. And a lot of people with mobility challenges ride bikes. And so then it becomes, a question of dignity, keeping people independent in their cities. So we want to keep that going through the winter. And part of that is providing the right type of infrastructure. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. And it sounds like Edmonton is also on the global wave of being a sustainable city, right? And providing sustainable mobility for all its citizens. But I know snow accumulation and icy condition for bicycle infrastructure can create lots of challenges for winter cycling. And I know between 2013 and 2015, the City of Edmonton conducted a snow clearing pilot project to determine the required snow clearing practices to allow people to cycle all year round safely. Mm-hmm. And what was the conclusion out of that pilot, and how is it influencing current and future active transportation projects?
Right. So this is actually a really interesting example of how do you interpret results. So that pilot project was conducted on first generation bike lanes, just paint on the road, right? It wasn't separated. It was just paint on the side of the road. And so the crews worked really, really hard to keep those clear. But the gravel and the snow and the ice, came off the vehicles and landed in the bike lane because it was the side of the road. And so they cleared it, but then they became mucky and slushy and icy really quickly. And then also when they were covered in snow, cars couldn't see them and would park on the side. So initially, the crews that were involved in this pilot project, they said we cannot keep bike lanes clear in the winter. It's just, we can't do it. It's not possible. And then, we took a step back and we said, but what if it's about infrastructure? What if we design bike lanes differently? And so the bike lanes we have now are protected, separated bike lanes. They're separated by a barrier. It helps keep that slush away from the actual bike lane itself. And we have special equipment that clears those bike lanes. And so what we discovered, and in talking to some other winter cities as well, is that winter is the best argument for those separated protected bike lanes. So what at first looked like a failure actually turned into something very positive when we had a look at those results again and said, well, how can we do it differently? Mm-hmm. So that's the standard now for us going forward. Wherever possible, we put in for on-street bike lanes, right? We have a lot of what we call multi-use trails mm-hmm. That are off the road. They go through neighborhoods. So those are different. But the on-street bike lanes, our standard now is those separated, protected bike lanes, and we can keep them clear.
Yeah, great. Yeah, it sounds like the type of bicycle infrastructure is evolving, right? With the increased experience, the city gains. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. Yep.
And I know some people argue that like winter maintenance for cycle tracks is very expensive, but it's only a fraction compared to the maintenance requirement for the maximum number of regular roadways, right?
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And if we can keep those clear, and what we've actually seen in Edmonton is that, so in Edmonton, our snow clearing, our sidewalk clearing policy is that the residents and businesses clear the sidewalk outside their properties. So Edmonton doesn't clear sidewalks. It's up to residents and business owners. So what we're seeing in many areas where there are bike lanes, the bike lanes are priority one clearing, so they get cleared first thing, just like the arterial roads. But because they get cleared, what we're seeing is we are seeing pedestrians using them, we're seeing wheelchair users using them, anybody with any kind of mobility aid. If the sidewalks haven't been cleared first thing, which is common, we get piecemeal because it's up to homeowners, right? It can be clear for most of the block, and then all it takes is one that's uncleared, and that can be a barrier for some people. But those bike lanes are clear, and so we're actually seeing multiple modes of active transportation in those bike lanes. So that, kind of begs another question. Maybe they're not just bike lanes, maybe they're mobility lanes. And I mean, we actually haven't asked that question here in Edmonton, but I think we're getting to that point just because of what we're starting to see, particularly in the wintertime, is how they're being used. I think, it's time to have another look and see. So it's been interesting to see how they've been used. Absolutely.
Yeah. So by carrying a cycle track or a dedicated bike lane is not only to benefit cyclists, but there's a profound effect to improve accessibility for all, right?
That's right. Absolutely. Yeah.
And one important feature and also a factor for the winter city success is the community-based approach, like you previously introduced. And can you share with us how your office collaborates with the community organization?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So like I mentioned at the beginning, we had that community-based task force. And then, once the implementation plan was adopted, we have an overarching advisory council. And so that council is made up of community members, and often they are leaders in their organizations. And then we have city staff, and at the advisory council level, they tend to be senior managers within the city organization, so that there's some buy-in from community and city, and we work together. So the strategy itself has 4 pillars. They're winter life. So those are all the actions about making it easier to work and play and move and get around in our city in winter. And then the winter design pillar, about designing and planning better. Winter economy, and that's about supporting our festivals and tourism and building a 4-season patio culture. And then the last one is our winter story, and that's that whole cultural shift and language and how we deal with it. Those 4 pillars each have a working group. And again, those working groups are made up of community members and city staff. And so community members are still very much involved in implementing the winter city strategy. And then when we work on particular actions, we review who should be the partners involved in this. Who else do we need to pull in? And it's, it's very much grounded in community, and we've worked really hard to keep it that way. We also just have partnerships with some organizations. We work with some who provide services to newcomers. We have a lot of people who come to Canada from other countries for whom winter is absolutely a new experience. And they, it's not just about getting outside, they need to learn how to dress, right? And they need to learn how to play outside in winter. So we support some of those organizations with small grants so that they can provide some some fun programming to introduce people to how to play outside. Sometimes they even need to just provide mittens, right? Or a toque, which is a very Canadian word, actually, right?
Yeah.
A knitted cap, so a toque, or a scarf, because they just don't know how to dress. And then we also work with some of our social agencies. We support some of them, ones that work with our citizens who are struggling with homelessness or with our Indigenous peoples, because for them, let's face it, for people who are struggling with homelessness, winter can be a very dangerous time. And we're very aware of that. And as much as we try to talk about winter positively and get people to embrace it, there is a segment of the population for whom it can be a very dangerous time. So we try and support them as much as we can, and involve them, where it's appropriate, in the actions that we're implementing.
So your office does not only provide like policy guidance, but sometimes also financial support for the community groups as well.
Yeah, we do provide some. Yeah, we have some small grants that go out to different community groups. In Edmonton, we have what's called a community league system, much like neighborhood systems in other cities, and they provide local recreation. They build a lot of our community skating rinks in the wintertime. So we have, we have a small grant that we can give to them, for lights, for example, if they want to put up lights or have a fire pit. Particularly this winter with COVID, they've had to close their buildings, but they've built the skating rinks anyway. And so they needed somewhere for people just to change skates. So buying benches or buying hay bales for people to sit on, having a fire pit for people to warm up at. That's what a lot of that money went to this year. And we work with a couple of our ski hills to provide ski and snowboard lessons for newcomers and for youth from low-income families. So yeah, we do. We have a little bit of financial support that goes to some groups.
Yeah. But fundamentally is very much a bottom-up approach, right? Engaging the
absolutely
the communities.
Yeah. And in Edmonton, that's the approach that has always worked. Top-down doesn't work very well in our city. Just the city has found that in the past. So what we do is we look to see what can we support that's already happening. Why reinvent the wheel? We have very active community members in Edmonton. We have a long history of volunteerism. So if we can just support them, then those dollars can go further.
Absolutely. And the next question is about, the fundamental pillar of the winter city strategy is changing our winter narrative from one that was indifferent to winter to one that takes pride in winter. And I'm sure you have encountered many skeptics and stubbornness over the journey. And imagine if you had to do it again in another city, what would you do differently to make the storytelling more effective?
So that's an interesting question, because we really felt that those actions in the story pillar would be the hardest to meet and would take the longest. And what we found is actually that cultural shift has happened really quickly and much faster than we ever imagined it would. And what we think happened was when we were developing the strategy and we said, what would help you fall in love with winter? Just having that conversation and reminding people of how much fun they had as children. Often we said, what's your favorite winter memory? And it was usually from childhood, because let's face it, kids play in the snow. They know how to play in the snow. It's adults who forget. We forget how to dress, so we get cold and we don't want to stay outside. So we've actually seen that cultural shift. We saw it starting to happen before council even adopted the strategy, which was really a huge surprise for us. We worked with or consulted a little bit for 880 Cities, which is an organization based out of Toronto, and they had a large grant to work with 3 American cities on a project called Winter Mission, and it was to combat social isolation. And what those 3 cities have also found is that just talking about winter and changing the way that the city itself talks about it and has started to change that narrative. And so it's actually, it's happened much faster for us and for those 3 communities than anybody expected it would. And so it's been very interesting. We started with Facebook and with Twitter as our social media platforms. And we had to police it a little bit to start with, because like you said, there are skeptics, and Edmontonians were very good about complaining about winter. But we now, within a couple of years, within about 3 years, we no longer had to respond to people. The communities themselves on Facebook and on Twitter were dealing with that. People were calling each other out and saying, come on, it's not that bad, it's still sunny, it might be a bit cold, but just, put on another sweater and get out. So it's been a very interesting journey as far as changing that narrative. So what I would suggest to other cities is just start talking about it, but include community. You have to include community, and you have to ask people, what's good about winter in our city? Because there's always something good. There will always be people who won't like winter, and that's okay. It's just a fact of life. There are people who don't like heat. There are people who don't like cold. So just, but involve the community in the conversation, and see what happens. I think it'll happen much sooner than people expect.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think keep talking about winter, right? I think we just need a couple successful stories, and then it kind of creates the community movement.
Yes, and when I think back, actually, we also included some community leaders, right? We went to meteorologists and we said to them, can we just talk about how you talk about winter, right? Because let's face it, the meteorologists are often one of the first voices people hear in the morning. They turn on the radio, they turn on the TV, they want to know what the weather's going to be like for the day. How do they need to dress? And so if the meteorologist is reporting the weather and they say, it's -20, it's really cold outside, just, stay inside as much as you can, that's not a very positive message. But if they say, it's -20, it's very sunny outside, just bundle up and get out and enjoy the day, it's a completely different message. And so we worked with some of our meteorologists and some of our radio hosts, and we just had a conversation with them and said, how can we change this a little bit? Because they have a lot of influence on how people respond to their day first thing in the morning. So involve those community leaders as well. I think it's really, really important.
Yeah, great.
Yep.
Well, we have been experiencing the pandemic, and as we all know, and many cities, including the City of Edmonton, are facing operational and financial challenges. Can you share some insights or tips as to how winter design can adapt during COVID? And what would you suggest other municipalities that has little resource to start from to become a winter-friendly city?
Right. So winter design is really the basis for supporting outdoor winter life. And so here in Edmonton, we have a legacy of our city just being built like many other North American cities and many southern cities. And so some of our public spaces are not the most comfortable in the winter just because of how they've been built. And so the foundational action in that winter design pillar was to write winter design guidelines for Edmonton. And so that's it. It was about a 2-year project, again, involving large working group with community and industry and city staff. And so we have now got guidelines so that we can improve how we build and plan our city. And so there are really 5 basic principles of winter design that are universal. And so those design guidelines that we have, if people are interested, they are available on the city website. And so some of those things, like I said at the beginning, when we designed our strategy, they had to be authentic and had to work for Edmonton. So some things work and in our context may not work in another context, but there are 5 basic universal winter design principles, and they are blocking wind. So if we can block wind from our public spaces, from the gathering spaces, and from some of our parks, then we immediately feel more comfortable, right? Because we know about wind chill, and it can just make the experience, can change the experience. So if we can block that wind, that makes for a better outdoor space for the wintertime. We also want to capture sunshine. So what I mean by that is we want to get that afternoon sun into those public gathering spaces. And actually, if we can just do those two things, block wind and capture sun, we can create a microclimate that can feel up to 15 degrees Celsius warmer than the ambient temperature. So if it's -10 outside, it can actually feel like +5 on a patio or on a bench outside of a recreation center or, you know, in a park, which is a huge difference for people who are just sitting outside, you know, and taking a break, and then, you know, getting back to whatever activity it was that they were doing. So 15 degrees Celsius is a huge difference. So just like I said, those two things, block wind, capture sunshine, if that's all you can do, work on those two. But in winter cities, we also want to add some color because our landscapes can be very, very white, very gray. Some of the Northern European cities have a lot of color in their buildings, which is really good for the winter landscape. Edmonton, as you know, is pretty gray and beige, you know, so we're working on that. We can add paint, you know, put in colorful benches. On patios, we can put out colorful blankets. Pre-COVID, of course, this year we're asking people to take their own blankets, but colorful blankets are really an invitation, right? And then adding lighting. And what I mean by that is not just adding lighting to make a space really bright. We want to be strategic with the lighting we add and be creative with it. But many winter cities get dark early. And so if it's dark by 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, if you want to continue to use skating trails for walking trails for people to walk on, you have to have some kind of lighting for them to keep using it. And let's face it, if we only use something till 3 o'clock in the afternoon, it's not a very good return on investment.
Yeah.
So if we add some lighting, it increases the number of hours that people can use that space. And it can also, lighting can be used for placemaking. So some of our festivals hang lanterns in trees. You know, we can add lighting temporarily. It doesn't have to be permanent. And then the very last one is adding the right type of infrastructure to support winter life. So some of those, again, are temporary. On some of our golf courses, we groom cross-country ski trails. Well, then we just put out a ski rack. You know, people need a place to put their skis. It doesn't have to stay there in the summer, but it needs to be there for the winter. We've put in some warming huts to give people a place to just go in, warm up. The ones we piloted were unheated. They worked like a greenhouse. And we just put them in the parks in the winter and took them out in the summer. But we also have some permanent infrastructure. We've added a natural gas fireplace in one of our parks. It has a fixed grill. We don't need a staff member to monitor it. We turn it on in the morning, turn it off at night. And so it just gives people a place to warm up. And so the right type of infrastructure really makes a huge difference for how we support winter life. Now, a lot of this stuff is as far as winter design goes, is a bit of a longer term goal. So in a COVID context, one of the things that I've said to other cities is what's already happening. You know, if you're not in a really strict lockdown and there are community events that are run by community organizations, how can you support those? You know, or are there people who are skiing in certain parks? Can you groom them for them instead of them having to break trail all the time? Can you support what's already happening? Another thing I've said to other cities is, what barriers exist to outdoor winter life? So are there policies or regulations that are getting in the way? So Calgary is another city in Edmonton, and they, as far as fire pits goes, residents had to go and get a fire permit to use a fire pit in their parks. Now, Edmonton has never had that. We have a lot of fire pits particularly in our river valley parks. People can use them, they take their own firewood, they get used year round. But in Calgary, it was different. And so they found that all they had to do was change that policy or that regulation. And then people started using them. The city also started providing free firewood, and they added a lot of fire pits in their parks for people to use this winter. In other places, patio permits are just for the summer. And it used to be like that here in Edmonton. Now our patio permits are for year round. So if that's a barrier to allowing restaurants to extend their seating, to have people outside in the winter, get rid of it. Even if it's just a temporary lifting of some of those regulations, try it, see how it works. And then, are you using your streets? It was another question. We saw last summer, a lot of cities around the world just closed the streets to vehicles and opened them to people. But then they got opened again to vehicles in the wintertime. Because winter came, they changed it and they closed the streets. And streets are, in most places, our largest public asset.
Mm-hmm.
Now, to be fair, in Edmonton, we did close hours, and snow clearing was one of the reasons given. I wasn't involved in those conversations, so I can't say what all of the, everything that came to that, what was used for that decision. So there are some things I don't know about. But we also have been in very strict lockdown. So I'm not sure right now for us that opening streets would be an answer, but it might be an answer for some other cities. It's cheap to do, right? So that's when you talk about fiscal restraints, that's a really easy way to increase your public space and to give people a place to be in COVID while we're physically distancing. Add some fire pits to those streets. Maybe you need to hire a staff person to monitor it. Or maybe you can work with a community group to have a volunteer monitor those fire pits. But those are just some ideas that could maybe help. I've also recommended to some cities just increase your maintenance. Some cities don't clear pathways in their parks in the winter. That's a really easy way to encourage people to use parks. Seniors in many, many cities are healthy, they're active, but as soon as they see an unplowed pathway, they will not use it because a fall becomes a life-changing event for them. So if you can increase your maintenance, it gets more people out. It also helps people with other kind of mobility challenges, whether it's someone who uses a wheelchair or a parent with a child in a stroller. Just clear the pathways. Another thing we've done here in Edmonton is we now leave our picnic tables in our parks. We used to take a lot of them out in the winter and store them. Now we just leave them and we encourage people, have a winter picnic, get out, take hot chocolate with you, just get out and use those spaces. So if you're removing picnic tables, just leave them. In some places, you can leave piles of snow for kids to play on. That's cheap and easy, just pile it up. As long as it's clean snow, let the kids play on it. Providing the right type of infrastructure, like I suggested before, benches, fire pits, that kind of thing. There's a city in the States, Eau Claire, Wisconsin, which was part of that winter mission project I mentioned earlier. What they did to get gear to people, because often people are reluctant to go and buy snowshoes or buy cross-country skis because they have to put out money, right? And then they may not enjoy that activity. But if we can provide free equipment for them to try it, then it opens up that activity for a lot of people, and then they can purchase if they want to. So what Eau Claire did was they started a gear share in their library system. They already had that infrastructure in place. All people needed was their library card to go and get some free snowshoes, take them out for a few hours and take them back. So that's again, looking at what you already have, what's in place, what can you use. And so a library system is actually a really good way. They had toboggans as part of their gear share as well, and some other winter games. And then another thing I've suggested to places is promote what's happening. We're 8 years into this. We have very robust social media suite. We have an external website that has all kinds of information. We list all the events and festivals on there. We put out a winter excitement guide every year, and we now have a podcast called Snow and Tell. But we're 8 years into this. Right now, for cities that are starting out, just have a hub somewhere that has all of that winter information. Where can people go skating? Where can they rent skates? Which pathways are cleared? Where is there cross-country skiing? So whether that's a page on the city website or it's a Facebook account or it's an external website, whatever that is, whatever works for your city, just promote, let people know what's happening and where they can go. And so basically it all comes down to create an invitation for people to be outside. Whatever that looks like, whatever works for your city, just, create that invitation and encourage people to get out.
Yeah,
So
totally agree.
that was a very long answer, but I hope there are lots of good ideas in there.
Well, these are great ideas. Yeah, in the end, I mean, cities can either start from little or large, but like you said, you have to keep talking about winter, right? Promote what's working while you maybe look at things that you can change, look at some creativity, like to change regulations, to create new programs, to invite people to embrace winter, to enjoy winter. Yeah.
Right. And actually what we heard when we were developing the strategy, so Councillor Henderson went and visited some northern Scandinavian cities, and I believe it was the mayor of Oslo at the time, said that they have to remind people every year that winter can be fun. So it's not just a matter of doing it this winter. If you want to have long-term change, every year you have to remind people that winter can be fun, which is why we started producing the Winter Excitement Guide, just to let people know this is what's happening this winter, right? Listing the events and the festivals and where they can do different activities. So that promotion, don't give up on it, keep it going.
Yeah,
it's really important.
Mm-hmm. Wow, Isla, you do remind me so much of my great winter memories in Edmonton. I appreciate that. Yeah, and thank you so much.
Ottawa has some great winter activities too, right? So, because it's another good winter city, so they've got some good things going on there.
Yeah, I'm starting to experience that too.
Good,
yeah.
Excellent.
Well, thank you so much, Isla, for sharing your insights and experience about winter city design. And I really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And if people have questions, feel free to email the questions to academy@mobicon.com, and I'll again pass them on to Isla to answer them. And please note the next MobyCon Academy section will be a study tour of the Dutch suburb of Houten, and will be hosted by Houten resident Mirjam de Bok. And be sure to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on social media to stay up to date on what is happening with MobyCon and the Academy. And I'll see you next time. Thanks again, Isla. Thank you everyone for watching.